Imagine a toll booth, right, but on the ocean.
Yeah, a very expensive one.
Exactly, not like a small symbolic fee. We're talking a $2 million cover charge just to sail your ship through a tiny strip of water.
Which is just, I mean, it's wild to even think about.
Right. And now imagine the country collecting that toll is pulling in, well, an estimated $96 billion a year.
Yeah.
And the United States military, with all its aircraft carriers and, stealth bombers, literally cannot do a thing to stop them.
It sounds totally fictional.
It really does. If you were listening to this right now, that probably sounds like the plot of some crazy geopolitical thriller. But according to the incredibly dense source material we're diving into today, that is not a hypothetical scenario at all.
No, not at all.
That is the proposed new reality of the Middle East. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are so thrilled you're joining us because our mission today is to unpack this exact crisis.
And it is a crisis that moves so fast,
Oh, incredibly fast. We are using a single, highly detailed primary source for this. It's a recent interview transcript featuring commentator Mario Nawfal and former CIA analyst Larry Johnson.
Right, which gives us a lot of really granular detail.
It does. But before we get into the weeds, and believe me, these weeds are incredibly tall today, I really need to set a strict boundary for our conversation.
Yeah, that's crucial here.
The material we are examining contains heavily politically charged content. I mean, it touches on volatile U.S. domestic politics, deeply entrenched Middle Eastern conflicts, and just the raw nerve of international relations. So we are not taking any sides here.
Zero sides.
Exactly. Our goal is strictly to impartially report and analyze the viewpoints, the claims, and the military logic that are presented in this specific source material, not to endorse them. We are just your guides, mapping out the terrain so you can understand the arguments being made by the people on the ground.
That is exactly right. We're just here to dissect the claims and the perceived realities of the actors involved. Because when the dust actually settles on military actions, the real battle always begins at the negotiation table.
Yeah, paperwork.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is how the traditional balance of power has seemingly just, flipped overnight.
It really feels like it.
Because for 80 years, the assumption has been that American military supremacy dictates the terms of any engagement, right?
Right. We have the biggest guns, we make the rules.
Exactly. But the text we're analyzing suggests that the terms being presented right now, well, they do not look like the terms of a nation that was just subjected to a superpower's wrath.
Okay, let's unpack this because we really have to start with the tangible terms of the ceasefire. I mean, understanding what Iran is demanding reveals exactly how they perceive their own position of strength following this military exchange.
Right. It's a huge tell.
Let's look at this 10-point plan that Iran presented via Pakistan. When I first read through this list in the source, I actually had to pause. Oh, yeah.
Because it reads less like a negotiation and more like a ransom note.
It is a completely maximalist position. I mean, the Iranian Supreme National Security Council laid out a document that demands an absolute overhaul of the region's entire security architecture.
Right. So let's just go through the key demands because there are a lot of them.
Let's do it.
First, controlled passage of the Strait of Hormuz under Iranian coordination.
Which is huge.
Second, an end to military actions against allied groups, specifically naming Hamas and Hezbollah. Third, the complete withdrawal of U.S. forces from the entire region.
Yeah, just get out.
Literally.
Okay.
Fourth, the establishment of a formal security protocol in the Strait that basically affirms Iran's role.
Yeah.
Fifth, full compensation for damages.
War reparations, essentially.
Exactly. Sixth, the complete removal of all sanctions.
Uh-huh.
Seventh, the unfreezing of all Iranian assets globally. And finally, the formal approval of all these terms in a binding UN Security Council resolution.
If you look at the mechanics of what they are asking for, it's just breathtaking.
It really is. I mean, removing sanctions, securing war reparations, forcing a U.S. withdrawal. But the cornerstone of this entire document, the lever they are using to try and force the rest of it into existence, is that very first point.
The Strait.
Yes, the controlled passage of the Strait of Hormuz.
And this is where we get back to that toll booth I mentioned. Because the financial math presented in the source is wild.
Oh, it's staggering.
They are proposing that Iran, alongside Oman, will charge a $2 million passage fee for every single ship going through the strait during this 2-week ceasefire plan. $2 million.
And when the analysts in the source extrapolate that number based on, daily shipping traffic, the math just becomes world-changing.
Yeah, break that down for it.
Well, at $2 million a ship, They calculate that to be roughly $8 billion a month,
Wow.
which means $96 billion a year in new, untethered revenue for Iran.
Okay, wait, let me stop you right there. $96 billion. I mean, there is no way the global shipping industry just absorbs that kind of cost, right? How does this actually work mechanically? Are they sending guys with briefcases full of cash onto the decks of these oil tankers?
Right, like an old movie.
Yeah. And wouldn't the maritime insurance companies effectively shut down the strait before the U.S. military even had to get involved?
It's a brilliant question, and it really gets to the heart of how global trade actually functions. So no, it's not physical cash in a briefcase.
That would be heavy.
Very heavy. It would likely be handled through complex sovereign transfers, perhaps utilizing currencies outside the U.S. dollar system.
Like BRICS.
Exactly, which we will definitely get to later regarding the BRICS nations. But your point about insurance is the actual key here.
Okay.
The insurance market for international shipping, like Lloyd's of London, it relies entirely on risk assessment. If Iran proves that it can and will fire upon any ship that does not pay the toll, the area becomes a strict war risk zone.
So the premiums go through the roof.
The insurance premiums would skyrocket so fast, to the point where it might actually be cheaper for the shipping companies to just pay the $2 million toll to Iran to guarantee safe passage.
Wait, really? Just pay the extortion?
Yeah, rather than paying an astronomical, totally unrecoverable premium to an insurance company with absolutely no guarantee the ship won't be sunk anyway.
Oh, wow. So Iran is basically forcing the global market to do the math.
Exactly.
Pay our toll or lose your entire ship. I was trying to conceptualize this, and I keep coming back to the analogy of, like, a nightclub bouncer.
Okay, I like that.
In this scenario, Iran is acting as the heavily armed bouncer at the door of a very exclusive club, the Persian Gulf. But here is the deeper layer. The United States used to own the club.
Right.
So what happens when the club owner realizes their own security guards cannot physically remove the new bouncer?
The owner is forced to negotiate.
Exactly. But I really have to push back on the terminology here because the U.S. government, according to the source, is demanding that the strait be open. How in the world can a strait be considered open if you're being extorted for $2 million just to float on it?
Well, that is the exact crux of the diplomatic doublespeak occurring right now.
Ah, semantics.
Entirely. When the United States says open, they mean free, unhindered maritime navigation according to international law. Anyone can sail in, anyone can sail out, no tolls, no threats.
Right, like normal.
But for Iran's definition of open, according to the transcript, is entirely conditional. It means ships can sail safely, the waters are physically passable, and you won't be targeted by anti-ship missiles, provided you pay the fee.
So paying the bouncer gives the international community the illusion that the door is still open.
Precisely. The source suggests that if ships are physically moving in and out, paying the fee but not sinking, politicians in the West might be able to spin that.
They'll just say, look, the strait is open.
Exactly. But the actual sovereign control of that choke point has shifted. And the domestic implications for Iran, if they actually secure this $96 billion a year, are transformational.
Yeah, the source talks about this. It's a total inversion of the Middle Eastern economy.
It is. I mean, if Iran suddenly has an influx of $96 billion annually, their massive unemployment problem just evaporates.
Overnight.
The source paints a picture of an unprecedented construction boom to rebuild the country. It actually goes so far as to speculate that the vast populations of migrant workers currently facing, harsh, exploited conditions in places like Abu Dhabi, Dubai, or Qatar,
Right.
they might actually start migrating to Iran to work in this new construction sector.
Wow, that would completely rewrite the economic gravity of the Persian Gulf.
Entirely.
Okay, but we have to look at the upcoming Friday negotiations in Islamabad that are mentioned in the text. Will these terms actually hold?
That's the big question.
Or is this 10-point plan just a massive PR anchor? Like in a negotiation, anchoring by asking for the moon so that when you settle for the atmosphere, you still win?
It is highly likely it serves as an anchor. The speakers in the source debate whether the U.S. and the Gulf states could ever formally, permanently accept a toll booth on the Strait of Hormuz.
I mean, they couldn't, right?
The institutional intuition is, no, they couldn't. It violates the fundamental tenets of freedom of navigation. But then the source immediately forces us to look at the terrifying alternative.
Which is?
If you do not accept the diplomatic solution, the toll booth, what is the military solution required to physically force the strait open?
And that pivot is chilling. Because it forces us to transition from what Iran is demanding to the underlying mechanics of why they feel so incredibly emboldened to demand it.
Exactly.
They are demanding a toll booth because they believe they just mathematically prove that no one can physically stop them from setting it up, which brings us to the military reality check in this transcript.
And the claims made here are historic.
Yeah.
I mean, the source explicitly claims that the United States lost more aircraft in the last 48 hours of this specific conflict than it has since the Vietnam War.
I really want you to just pause and think about the weight of that statement.
It's massive.
More American aircraft lost in a 48-hour window than in the entirety of the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, or any other conflict spanning the last 50 years, combined.
It completely shatters the paradigm of American air superiority. And we have to ask why.
Right. What changed?
The source points to a dramatic improvement in Iran's air defense capabilities, specifically mentioning modern radars, speculated to be either Chinese or Russian in origin. And this made U.S. military planners highly, highly nervous.
Let's break that down a bit, because I hear new radar and my brain just thinks, okay, maybe the dish spins faster.
Right.
But why does a new radar suddenly neutralize advanced American stealth fighters? What is the actual mechanism there?
It comes down to how stealth technology actually works and how modern air defenses have adapted to counter it over the last few decades. Stealth aircraft are not actually invisible. Their geometry is designed to deflect traditional single-source radar waves away from the receiver, kind of like a mirror angling a flashlight beam away from your eyes.
Right, so the ping doesn't bounce back.
Exactly. They also use radar-absorbent materials. But the modern systems the source alludes to likely utilize multi-static radar networks.
Wait, multi-static?
Yes. Instead of having one radar dish sending out a ping and waiting for it to bounce straight back, a multi-static network has a transmitter in one location and multiple receivers scattered across hundreds of miles in different locations.
Oh, wow.
So when the stealth fighter deflects the radar wave away from the source, one of those hidden, widely dispersed receivers catches the deflected wave.
Ah, so they catch the bounce.
Exactly. And through massive computing power, the network pieces those scattered reflections together to track the stealth aircraft in real time.
That is wild.
The implication is that the U.S. military went in expecting a standard, overwhelming air campaign where they own the skies, and instead they hit a networked wall of advanced defense that could actually see and target them.
That is fascinating. So the invisible shield isn't invisible anymore.
Not at all.
But according to the transcript, it wasn't just the air defense that surprised them. It was the absolute resilience of Iran's offensive capabilities, specifically these underground missile cities.
Oh, yeah.
Because the assumption was that the U.S. would just bomb the launch sites and end the threat. But they couldn't.
And the irony layered into this is just incredible.
There really is.
The transcript states that the system Iran used to protect these missile cities, burying them incredibly deep and encasing them in a highly specific type of reinforced concrete. It was actually based on architectural and engineering designs the United States had drawn up decades ago.
Right. Blueprints originally intended to help American structures survive a direct nuclear attack.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Iran apparently spent the last 2 decades meticulously building these subterranean complexes based on U.S. nuclear survival physics.
That is just... The irony is palpable.
It is. The mechanics of a conventional bunker-buster bomb rely on kinetic energy and a delayed fuse to penetrate earth and concrete before exploding. But there is a physical limit to how much earth and reinforced concrete a conventional weapon can punch through.
Right. Physics is physics.
When conventional U.S. bombers, even the most advanced ones we have, tried to take out these missile launchers, they were dropping conventional weapons onto infrastructure mathematically designed to withstand nuclear yields.
So it barely scratches the surface.
The facilities were simply buried too deeply. The physics did not favor the bombs.
So if the air campaign fails to destroy the threat, if the bombers literally can't reach the launchers, what is the alternative military solution? Because the source lays out the logistics of what a true military victory over Iran would require, and it sounds like a logistical impossibility.
The breakdown in the text is daunting. To actually secure a military solution, to physically stop the drone and rocket launches and permanently secure the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah.
The source estimates it would require mobilizing 2 to 3 million troops.
2 to 3 million. I mean, that is drafting the population of a major American city.
It is a scale of warfare unseen since World War II. You would have to launch an unprecedented amphibious assault, land troops, and take control of an entire hostile coastline stretching 100 to 200 miles north to south.
Just to get a foothold.
And that just gets you on the beach. To stop the missiles, you would then have to fight your way 300 miles into the mountainous interior of the country to physically clear out all those deeply buried launch sites.
It's just not going to happen. It makes me think of the analogy used right in the source, the analogy of the angry dog.
Yeah, that's a good one.
The speaker says, imagine you see an angry dog inside a fenced yard. You open the gate, walk in, and the dog bites you. You leave, wait a couple of hours, and then you walk back into the exact same yard expecting a different result, and it bites you again.
Right.
You can't say, God, I'm surprised it bit me.
It is a visceral metaphor for the repeated underestimation of an adversary. It perfectly captures a failure to recognize the reality of the situation on the ground.
But isn't that essentially the definition of asymmetric warfare? Like, you don't actually have to win, you just have to not lose.
That is exactly it. Asymmetric warfare is when two belligerents have wildly disproportionate military power. So the weaker power uses unconventional tactics to exploit the stronger power's vulnerabilities.
Yeah, right.
The source notes that there was never a mathematical chance Iran was going to outright destroy the United States military. That wasn't the goal.
Of course not.
What Iran needed to do was survive the initial overwhelming barrage, maintain their ability to project force like shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, and inflict an unacceptable level of political and economic cost on the attacker.
It's all about the psychology of deterrence, really. The speaker uses a great phrase. A card is only worth what the other person believes it is worth.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the ultimate American card for the last half-century has been the threat of overwhelmingly destructive air power.
Do what we say, or we will bomb your infrastructure back to the Stone Age.
Exactly. But the source makes a profound argument. If you play that card, if you launch the massive bombing campaign and it fails to achieve total destruction, that card is gone.
It's spent.
The illusion of omnipotence is shattered forever. Iran now knows, and more importantly, the entire globe now knows, the physical limitations of U.S. air power against deeply buried, near-peer defended targets.
So Iran is now holding a brand new card. The transcript implies their new card is, we can shut down the global economy by bombing the hell out of the Strait of Hormuz, and we can bury our assets so deep that even your B-2 stealth bombers can't touch them.
And that card fundamentally alters the geometry of power in the region.
Okay, so if the United States, with its unparalleled military budget, cannot achieve dominance in this specific geographical reality, we have to look at the other major player involved here.
We do.
We need to examine the position of the U.S.'s primary regional ally, Israel. Because according to the text, Israel is bearing the immediate devastating brunt of this new reality.
The situation described inside Israel is one of profound, potentially unsustainable strain.
Yeah, it sounds incredibly difficult.
The transcript paints a picture of a nation facing a severe demographic manpower crisis, coupled with an economy that is just, well, grinding to a halt.
The numbers provided in the source are startling. It states that Israel has a baseline population of roughly 10 million, but estimates that up to 2 million people have left the country.
Which is a huge percentage.
Massive, bringing the functional population down to around 8 million. And out of those 8 million people, they called up 300,000 reserves for the immediate aftermath of October 7th.
Right.
And now the source says the government is discussing calling up an additional 400,000 reserves for a potential full-scale conflict in Lebanon.
Think about the mechanics of what that actually means for a modern, highly developed nation.
Yeah.
Israel's military doctrine is almost entirely dependent upon a reserve army.
It's not like the U.S.
No. These are not full-time professional career soldiers stationed at a base. These are everyday citizens.
Right.
They are software engineers in Tel Aviv, agricultural workers, doctors, teachers, truck drivers. When you pull 700,000 working-age adults out of a population of 8 million, you are stripping the domestic economy of its essential workforce.
The factories stop running.
Yes.
The tech sector stalls. The tax base crumbles. It is an economic hemorrhage. And the daily reality for the citizens who remain is described in incredibly grim terms.
It's heartbreaking to read.
The source mentions politicians being asked on television how they are enjoying living in subways. It actually compares the population to moles or gophers because they are forced to spend so much time underground.
Because of the relentless waves of missile attacks. The text explicitly notes that there are at least 3 waves of missile attacks every single day, and the psychological expectation is that this tempo will not lighten up anytime soon.
And it isn't just the sheer volume of missiles falling from the sky either. The transcript details tactical surprises on the ground that are devastating traditional Israeli armor.
Yeah, this is unexpected.
For instance, it mentions that Hezbollah has adopted fiber optic drones, and they are using them to take out Israeli tanks left and right. Now, I have to ask you about this, because when I hear fiber optic, I immediately think of the internet cable buried in my neighborhood.
Exactly. High-speed internet.
Why would a military use a drone tethered to a physical wire? That sounds like a massive step backward in technology compared to wireless radio controls. I mean, wouldn't get tangled?
It sounds completely counterintuitive. But in the context of modern electronic warfare, it is a devastatingly brilliant adaptation.
How so?
So modern militaries, including Israel's, rely heavily on electronic jamming to defeat drones.
Like scrambling the signal.
Yes, they flood the area with radio frequencies to sever the wireless connection between the drone and the pilot, which causes the drone to crash or return to base.
Okay, that makes sense.
But a fiber optic drone literally spools out a microscopic thread of glass cable as it flies. The control signals and the high-definition video feed travel as light pulses down that physical wire.
Oh.
You cannot jam a physical wire with radio waves.
Wow.
It renders the millions of dollars Israel spent on electronic warfare jammers completely useless. Furthermore, because it's a physical connection, there is zero latency.
No lag.
None. The pilot has a perfect, unjammable, instantaneous view of the battlefield right up until the moment the drone impacts a multi-million-dollar tank.
Wow, so millions of dollars of high-tech defense is negated by a spool of glass wire?
Essentially, yes.
The Israeli media, according to the source, is continually expressing shock at these capabilities and surprise at Iran's ability to sustain missile fire for much longer than they expected.
This constant state of surprise points to a massive failure in intelligence assessment, which ties right back to that angry dog analogy we discussed.
Yeah, keep going back into the yard.
Exactly. But it also points to a deeper strategic compulsion within the nation itself. The source beautifully illustrates this compulsion with the classic fable of the frog and the scorpion.
Yes, here is where it gets really interesting. I love this part. The speaker uses this old story to describe Israel's military mindset.
Do you want to tell it?
Yeah, so the scorpion wants to cross a river, so he asks the frog for a ride on his back. The frog says, "No, you'll sting me." The scorpion argues, "If I sting you, we both drown, so it's not in my interest to sting you."
Makes logical sense.
Right, so the frog agrees. But halfway across the river, the scorpion stings the frog. As they are both sinking, the frog asks why, and the scorpion replies, "I couldn't help myself. I'm a scorpion. It's in my nature."
It is a tragic paradox. And the analysis here suggests that Israel, after decades of existential conflict and a very specific political indoctrination, which the text specifically attributes to the prolonged tenure of the Netanyahu government, has developed a mindset where they believe the only valid solution to any threat is kinetic war.
They just default to it.
Right. They are conditioned to deal with threats via preemptive, overwhelming military strikes. They feel they must strike to survive. They are the scorpion.
But let's go deeper than just the fable, because fables only take us so far. Why is Israel the scorpion? I mean, there has to be a strategic reason why they default to aggression, right? It's not just a personality trait.
Absolutely. And it comes down to a geopolitical concept called strategic depth.
Okay, unpack that.
Israel is a geographically tiny nation. In some places, it is only miles wide. If an enemy army breaches their borders, they are immediately in major population centers.
There's nowhere to retreat to.
Exactly. They do not have the luxury of trading land for time, falling back, and regrouping like Russia did against Napoleon or Germany. Because they lack strategic depth, their military doctrine dictates that they literally cannot fight a defensive war on their own soil. They must identify threats early and launch preemptive strikes to destroy the enemy on the enemy's territory. They literally cannot afford to wait.
But the reality of the river they are crossing has fundamentally changed. If you are geographically forced to strike preemptively, but you are now striking a mathematically superior foe.
Right.
A foe that has just proven it can withstand American bombardment.
Right.
And you do so without the absolute guaranteed backing of the U.S. military to finish the job. You drown.
Exactly. The source argues that Israel could only act as the scorpion in the past because it was enabled, funded, armed, and ultimately protected by the United States.
The U.S. was the safety net.
Always. But if the U.S. military realizes a ground war with Iran requires 3 million troops and refuses to engage, Israel is left facing a multi-front war of attrition.
Which they can't sustain.
They are utilizing a depleting reserve army, running out of munitions, watching their economy shatter, and facing a foe whose underground missile launches they cannot reach. From a purely strategic standpoint, it is totally unsustainable.
So we have a United States that has hit the physical limit of its conventional bombing efficacy, and an Israel that is stretching its demographic and economic elasticity to the breaking point.
Yeah.
This creates a massive, swirling power vacuum in the region, and the transcript details exactly how the surrounding nations and the global superpowers are rushing in to fill that void. This is where we see the geopolitical earthquake.
The primary conclusion drawn by the analysts in the source is that the Middle East has now officially been confirmed as a multipolar world.
Multipolar.
Yes, it is no longer a unipolar region dominated solely by U.S.-backed Israeli hegemony.
Okay, but what does a multipolar world actually mean in practice for the people living there?
Unipolar means one power calls all the shots. Multipolar means there are multiple centers of power that must negotiate with each other, constantly balancing alliances.
It's more complex.
Much more. The text explicitly names two superpowers in this new Middle Eastern reality: Israel and Iran. They are the two poles of power.
And the physical footprint of the old unipolar order is literally being erased as we speak. The source notes that U.S. military bases in the region are either being actively dismantled or have been completely wiped out.
Right.
It specifically mentions bases in Kuwait being in the process of being dismantled, Bahrain being done, and many other sites having already been abandoned or wiped clean.
Which forces the Gulf states into a brutal, pragmatic calculation. We're talking about immensely wealthy countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates.
Right, the oil states.
The source notes that these countries pride themselves on safety, security, and above all, business predictability.
They want stability for their markets.
Exactly. For decades, the United States was the guarantor of that safety. But the text argues that the U.S. presence didn't protect them during this latest crisis. In fact, having U.S. bases on their soil may have made them more of a target.
So if you are a Gulf state leader, and the American security umbrella is suddenly full of holes, what do? I mean, you don't act out of loyalty. You look at the balance sheet.
You look at the world with cold, objective pragmatism. And the source details a massive economic pivot occurring right now. In the midst of this crisis, these oil-rich countries are not buying U.S. Treasury bonds. They're actively loading up on Chinese bonds.
Wow.
The text even mentions France pulling its physical gold reserves out of the United States.
It is a total flight from the U.S. dollar and a flight from Western financial institutions.
Right.
The speaker in the source points directly to BRICS.
Which is a crucial shift.
For those who don't know, BRICS is an intergovernmental organization comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and newly admitted members, including Iran.
Right.
The argument made in the text is that BRICS now has a larger combined GDP than the G7 nations, and when you look at debt ratios, BRICS is in much better shape.
Let's explore those debt ratios, because that is the key to this entire financial pivot. The G7 nations, particularly the US, the UK, and parts of Europe, are carrying massive, historic levels of sovereign debt compared to their gross domestic product.
They are swimming in debt.
They are heavily leveraged. The BRICS nations, comparatively, have much lower debt-to-GDP ratios. From a strict business instinct, as the source frames it, the Saudis and Emirates are looking at which alliance offers long-term financial stability.
A heavily indebted West or a rising BRICS.
Exactly.
They may not align with Iran ideologically or religiously. In fact, the source points out that Gulf Arabs and Iran have historically fraught, sometimes actively hostile relations.
Very hostile.
But pragmatism reigns supreme. The text suggests these countries recognize that Iran, who now potentially controls the Strait of Hormuz, could actually be a more reliable economic partner in this new paradigm.
A partner born entirely out of necessity. The source says this pivot would require a spiritual rebirth on the part of the Gulf Arabs, overcoming centuries of sectarian tension.
That's a strong phrase.
It is. But economic gravity is a powerful force. Peace with Iran, inside the economic framework of BRICS, looks vastly more profitable and stable than participating in an endless destructive war alongside a retreating G7.
And speaking of a retreating G7, the source highlights a massive fracture in European unity. The United Western Front is crumbling.
Yes, the detail provided about Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is highly significant.
What's she doing?
The transcript reports that she is heading to Saudi Arabia and reportedly also planning a trip to Iran to secure bilateral energy deals.
which completely breaks the unified front. I mean, the U.S. asks its European allies to hold the line, to impose sanctions, to help force the strait open. And according to the source, no one came.
Right.
Instead, European leaders are looking at their domestic energy needs and flying directly to Tehran to make their own side deals for oil.
It is the definition of every man and woman for themselves, as one speaker notes. When your domestic survival and your winter energy security are on the line, abstract alliances dissolve very quickly. And hovering over all of this geopolitical maneuvering is China.
Always China.
The source states bluntly that because of the incredibly tight, comprehensive geopolitical and economic ties between China and Iran, if Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, de facto, China controls the Strait of Hormuz.
The source even mentions that the proposed peace deal itself was brought together by two incredibly unlikely players working in tandem. J.D. Vance from the U.S. side and China.
Talk about strange bedfellows.
Truly. China stepped in to help push Iran across the finish line. The shifting of global alliances here is dizzying, and all of these massive global shifts inevitably crash back onto the shores of American domestic politics.
They always do.
We have to look at how this ceasefire and the perceived American military retreat is playing out in the halls of Washington and the court of public opinion.
The political fallout in the U.S., particularly within the conservative Magi movement, is described in the text as a severe, profound split. Donald Trump is situated right at the epicenter of immense, conflicting political pressures.
The transcript maps out this internal fracture perfectly. On one hand, you have key allies like Tucker Carlson and J.D. Vance, who, according to the source, pushed incredibly hard for an end to the war.
They represent the America First wing.
Right, the wing that wants out of foreign entanglements. On the other hand, you have the old guard hardliners, represented in the text by an audio clip from conservative commentator Mark Levin, who are absolutely horrified by the prospect of a ceasefire with Iran.
The inclusion of the Mark Levin audio in the source material is a perfect case study of this ideological collision.
Yeah, let's talk about his reaction.
Let's analyze it as described in the text. He is audibly distraught, explicitly stating that it is morally very difficult to accept that the United States is going to just wash our hands of the Iranian people and abandon the region.
He sounds devastated.
He does. He points to the tactical reality that Hezbollah is still firing hundreds of missiles into Israel. His argument is that since Hezbollah is a proxy funded and directed by Iran, Iran has inherently already broken the terms of the ceasefire. He questions the sanity of the U.S. entering into a binding agreement with an entity that claims, conveniently, that it doesn't control its own proxy armies.
The host in the source actually describes Levin as being in a state of shock, comparing it to a computer system shutting down and rebooting.
That's a great description.
It is the sound of an older, hawkish, neoconservative paradigm violently colliding with a new, pragmatic, isolationist reality. But Donald Trump, who the source assumes is the primary political actor driving this decision on the U.S. side, has very different motivations for accepting this deal.
The analysis of Trump's motivations in the text is purely transactional and heavily focused on electoral math.
Right, what looks good to the voters.
The source points out two immediate indicators. The stock markets are reacting positively to the news of a ceasefire, and the prospect of stability is bringing the global price of oil down.
Those are huge.
Those are massive, immediate domestic wins for any politician.
Right, lower gas prices at the pump are the holy grail for a presidency, but the deeper, more structural motivation discussed is the sheer timeline of the war.
This is the critical part.
The transcript reveals that U.S. military planners were anticipating this conflict dragging on for at least 2 more years, projecting combat operations all the way through 2028.
And 2028 takes you right through the next presidential election cycle.
Oh, exactly.
For Donald Trump, whose entire political brand is built on the promise of no forever wars, getting sucked into a grueling, multi-year, unwinnable conflict in the Middle East.
Right, one that the source noted earlier might eventually require a draft or a massive national mobilization to find 3 million troops.
Yeah, that is a political death sentence. The risk-reward matrix is heavily skewed. He appears willing to accept the international perception of a geopolitical loss or a retreat if the domestic reward is a stable economy, cheap gas, and keeping his core anti-war base happy.
And to achieve that domestic stability, the source suggests he might take a diplomatic step that was previously unthinkable in American politics.
Yeah, this part is wild.
It introduces a tweet from an observer asking why Trump doesn't just dump Israel at this point. The argument presented is that stepping away from Israel would please his isolationist base, please the international community who wants the war to end, and please the Gulf Arabs, effectively removing the political toxicity of the failed Iran campaign.
The speakers in the source broadly agree with the viability of this possibility. They speculate that Trump needs to rapidly recover from the perceived military failure against Iran and distancing himself from the Zionist cause, as they phrase it.
Right.
It might lead to a swell of domestic and international support that makes voters quickly forget the geopolitical retreat. It represents a total paradigm-shifting realignment of U.S. foreign policy priorities.
And just to underscore how crazy this realignment is, the source points out the ultimate irony of the situation. Lindsey Graham.
Oh, man.
For 22 years, dating all the way back to the Iraq War in 2003, the source notes he has been the loudest, most reliably hawkish voice in Washington calling for the destruction of the Iranian regime.
Always calling for strikes.
Always. And yet, he is the one who recently put out a public post providing the political off-ramp, calling for an end to the war. When Senator Lindsey Graham says it's time to stop bombing the Middle East, you know the tectonic plates of American politics have shifted permanently.
It is a stunning reversal. And it is driven not just by politics, but by a very physical, exhausted reality behind the scenes.
The human element.
Exactly. The expert speaker in the text brings up the intense, debilitating fatigue within the U.S. military apparatus. He specifically describes the crisis action teams, known as CATs, operating at the Pentagon and the National Military Command Center.
What are they going through?
These teams have been working grueling, high-stress shifts, 12 hours on, 12 hours off for 6 straight weeks without a break.
And the prospect of forcing those teams to maintain that tempo through 2028 is destroying institutional morale.
I can't sustain that.
Add to that the impending logistical nightmare of a Middle Eastern summer. The source mentions temperatures regularly hitting 115 degrees by May. Operating in that heat makes mechanical maintenance a nightmare, degrades electronics, and actually affects the physical lift capabilities of aircraft operating in the hot, thin air. The American military machine is just deeply physically tired.
So you have a tired military, a fractured domestic political base, and an opponent that is operating with a surprising level of sophistication.
Which transitions us to the final major theme of the source material. How we understand the internal dynamics of Iran, their mastery of information warfare, and the terrifying, looming question of nuclear parity.
Yeah, let's talk about the PR war, because the source points out a fascinating contrast here.
Okay.
We, in the West, often frame Iranian leadership in a very specific box. We view them as these dour, humorless, fundamentalist fanatics.
Right, very serious.
But the transcript describes Iran releasing a high-quality AI-generated Lego video that brutally mocks the U.S. and Israel.
A Lego video?
Yes. They are essentially declaring victory in a format explicitly designed to go viral among a younger audience on social media.
The speaker in the text makes a brilliant psychological observation here. He notes that true fundamentalists do not have a sense of humor.
Right.
The fact that the Iranian apparatus is producing witty, highly effective, visually engaging propaganda using modern AI tools proves they possess a sophisticated, highly modern approach to information operations.
That's not what we expect.
Not at all. They are actively winning the narrative war online, appealing to 20 and 30-somethings globally, while the Western response is described in the text as being terrible at this kind of rapid digital messaging.
It's a complete mismatch in digital diplomacy.
Yeah.
And this cold pragmatism extends to the very top of their leadership structure, too.
Yeah, the new leader.
The source spends significant time discussing the new supreme leader, Ayatollah Mujtaba Khamenei. Again, contrary to the Western caricature of an isolated religious zealot, he is portrayed in the text as a hardened, highly pragmatic veteran of brutal combat.
His backstory is crucial to understanding how Iran might behave in the future. The source notes that he fought on the front lines during the horrific Iran-Iraq War as a teenager.
Which is a brutal war.
Incredibly brutal. He understands the profound, visceral human cost of war because he lived it in the trenches. He had personal friends killed by the MEK, a militant dissident group. And most importantly for this discussion, he personally survived chemical weapon attacks.
And this is where the transcript gets incredibly poignant and, frankly, uncomfortable for Western narratives.
Yeah, this part is heavy.
It notes that the chemical weapons deployed against him and his unit were provided to Iraq, courtesy of the United States.
Wow.
Yet, despite being gassed, and despite Iran having the world-class scientific expertise and industrial capacity to easily develop their own chemical weapons for retaliation, Iran never did.
And the reason given in the source is deeply rooted in theology. The leadership believed that utilizing weapons of mass destruction, specifically indiscriminate weapons like chemical gas, was a profound sin against Islam. Their religious convictions actually constrained their military retaliation even when they were facing an existential threat and suffering horrific casualties.
Which forces us to ask,
Yeah.
what does this all mean for the ultimate trump card in geopolitics?
The nuclear weapon.
Exactly. Because if Iran now controls the Strait of Hormuz and has successfully survived a direct U.S. assault, the next logical strategic step to permanently secure their new status as a regional superpower is acquiring a nuclear deterrent.
The text introduces intense, high-stakes speculation on this front. There is a debate about whether Iran might choose to bypass the slow, easily monitored process of enriching uranium themselves.
Which takes years.
Right. And simply purchase a fully functional, off-the-shelf nuclear warhead directly from North Korea.
Just buy it outright.
The logic presented is that they could acquire it quickly while Trump is in office, knowing full well that Trump views the Middle East as politically toxic and absolutely will not launch a new war to destroy their new weapon.
This raises an incredibly important question, and it is the central defining paradox of the final section of the text. Let's talk about game theory.
Okay, game theory.
From a purely mathematical game theory standpoint, the speaker argues that it makes imminent sense for Iran to acquire a couple of nuclear weapons to establish parity.
Yes, parity. Let's explain what that means in this context, specifically the concept of mutually assured destruction, or MAND.
Right, the Cold War concept.
During the Cold War, the US and the Soviets realized that if both sides had enough nukes to destroy the other, neither side could ever risk launching an attack.
It's suicide.
Exactly. The sheer terror of total annihilation actually created a morbid kind of stability. The text argues that Iran needs that exact same insurance policy. The logic is, touch us again and you get a nuke in Tel Aviv.
It definitively, permanently deters any future Israeli or U.S. conventional strikes.
But on the other side of that cold, calculated game theory, you have that exact same religious fidelity that prevented the use of chemical weapons in the 1980s.
You're right. The sin aspect.
The expert in the source acknowledges that Westerners have a very tough time wrapping their minds around this concept, but he believes there is genuine, deep-seated sincerity among the Iranian leadership that nuclear weapons are fundamentally a sin.
The tension here is immense.
It is. Will the pragmatic need for survival in a violent, multipolar Middle East eventually override a deeply held religious prohibition?
That's the question.
Will the new leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, driven by his pragmatic war experience, decide that an alliance with a nuclear-armed state like Russia or acquiring their own weapon is the absolute only way to guarantee his people are never attacked again?
It is the ultimate geopolitical cliffhanger. And meanwhile, internally, the source suggests Iran is experiencing an unexpected, powerful surge of unity.
Yeah, let's touch on that.
We all remember the massive, widely publicized anti-regime protests over women's rights just a year ago.
Of course.
But the transcript notes that dissidents and regular citizens, even successful engineers living comfortably in Europe, are reportedly returning to Iran.
Because the country was under foreign attack.
Precisely. The speaker notes that Iranian nationalism, specifically Persian nationalism, is on the rise.
A rallying around the flag effect.
Yes, the external threat of American and Israeli bombs has unified a previously fractured populace, and the government is reportedly showing more flexibility on social issues, like the strict enforcement of the hijab, to maintain that fragile unity.
Wow.
With the very real prospect of $96 billion a year flowing in to solve their economic woes, the regime is suddenly looking more secure, both internally and externally, than it has in 45 years of punishing sanctions.
So let's bring this all back to the surface. We have gone incredibly deep today. We started with a 10-point plan that looked like a ransom note, demanding physical control of the Strait of Hormuz for $2 million a ship.
Yeah, that toll booth.
We explored the staggering military revelations underground, nuclear-proof missile cities, and the shocking failure of American air power to bypass advanced radar networks.
We analyzed the unbearable structural strain on Israel's reserve army and its economy, locked in the tragic, geographically necessitated mindset of the Scorpion.
We watched the geopolitical map redraw itself, with Gulf states abandoning the dollar for BRICS and Chinese bonds based on cold, hard debt-GDP ratios.
We looked at the fracture of the U.S. domestic political landscape, with a deeply fatigued military and a political establishment willing to sacrifice historic alliances for short-term economic relief and lower gas prices.
And finally, we examine the pragmatic, highly sophisticated leadership of an Iran that is navigating its way toward absolute regional supremacy.
The post-World War II world order is actively being rewritten in real time, right in front of us.
And if you are listening to this, you might be wondering why all this high-level geopolitical maneuvering matters to your daily life.
It matters a lot.
It comes down to this. This isn't just about lines on a map thousands of miles away. It is about the price of the fuel you put in your car. It is about the cost of every single manufactured good shipped across the ocean. It is about the stability of the global economic system that your retirement fund is tied to.
Everything is connected.
When a choke point like the Strait of Hormuz changes hands, the ripple effects reach every grocery store and gas station on Earth.
Which brings us to a final lingering thought. Something the source material implies, but leaves hanging in the air for us to ponder.
What's that?
If the absolute bedrock of global security and economic stability for the last 80 years has been the unquestioned belief in American military supremacy, what happens to every other disputed border, island, and territory on Earth the morning after the world decides that supremacy has physical limits?
That's a scary thought.
Does a multipolar world mean we are going to see a rise in localized violent conflicts? Or does a new balance of terror force a new, uneasy global peace?
We are back to the muddy waters. The clean, simple lines of how we used to view the world are gone, and we are left trying to diagnose a landscape that is fundamentally shifting under our feet. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives, keep exploring the sources, and we'll see you next time.